The dense and rugged Alaskan wilderness provided the perfect cover for a fierce and sadistic killer. He preyed on women, kidnapping them, raping them, torturing them. He hunted them like animals for his own twisted pleasure.
In the 1970s and 80s, people went to Alaska looking for a fresh start, to reinvent themselves, or to disappear for a while. Some of those disappearances weren't by choice. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. A serial killer's rampage was exposed when the bodies of young women began turning up in shallow graves that dotted the Alaskan wilderness. The killer was at home in the rugged terrain, but the hunt for him began 3,000 miles away, where FBI profilers mapped the criminal's mind.
She was a hopeful young model looking for her break. She accepted a job with a man who claimed to be a photographer, but turned out to be a merciless killer. She wasn't his first victim, or his last. From the 70s through the mid-80s, the wilderness of Alaska became a popular destination as people flowed north to construct the Alaskan pipeline. The population boomed. On August 13th, 1982, two off-duty Anchorage police officers were hunting moose near the Knik River, in a wilderness about 20 miles from Anchorage. As they made their way through the dense forest, they happened upon partially buried human remains. They left it undisturbed. The next day, crime scene technicians from the Alaska State Troopers arrived at the scene. Crimes out here fell under state jurisdiction. Besides clothing and an elastic bandage, troopers found a .223 caliber shell casing in the shallow grave.
Conveniently buried here in the sand.
Dental records identified the remains as 23-year-old Sherry Morrow, an exotic dancer reported missing a year earlier by her boyfriend. Troopers called him in to break the news. Her clothes matched the ones he reported her missing in, but her good luck charm, the gold arrowhead pendant she never took off, was gone. Morrow was probably murdered shortly after she disappeared, giving the killer more than a year to cover his tracks. Finding him would be next to impossible. In the year following the discovery of Sherry Morrow's body, more women began turning up. It's a sad truth that finding bodies in the Alaskan wilderness wasn't all that unusual. 2 or 3 times a year, some novice hiker or hunter would get lost and succumb to the elements. But a growing number of bodies had a different story to tell. During new road construction on September 2nd, 1983, a crew unearthed human skeletal remains not far from where Sherry Morrow's body had been found 1 year earlier. The bones had obviously been here for some time. Yet until recently, this area of the Knik River was so remote that it could only be accessed by boat or light plane. The remains were identified as 17-year-old Paula Goulding, an out-of-work secretary who had moved to Alaska from Hawaii. She had been missing for 5 months. Like Sherry Morrow, she had taken a job as an exotic dancer to make ends meet. And like Sherry Morrow, a .223 caliber cartridge was found at the site. For Alaska State Trooper Wayne Van Clausen, the connection was frightening.
And that's about when everything started to become kind of scary for everybody, because the profile was the same. They were topless dancers from the clubs downtown, but that was certainly when there was the belief that there was a serial murderer out there.
2 bodies had been found, but now troopers believed there were more. They began to revisit missing persons reports. Many of those reported missing were exotic dancers, but in Alaska, their disappearance was not unusual.
Missing persons was a relatively low priority. Statutorily, if you're an adult, you have a right to be missing. And there were a lot of instances where these girls would just jump on a plane and go away.
Between 1980 and 1983, 12 women had been reported missing. That was only a fraction of the unreported total. Troopers now wondered how many of the missing women were victims of the killer. That would be difficult to determine. The Alaska State Troopers sent the evidence from the Sherry Morrow and Paula Goulding crime scenes to the FBI's laboratory in Washington, D.C. for analysis. The FBI ran ballistics tests on both shell casings to see if they were shot from the same gun. State troopers hoped the results could provide them with strong evidence that the same person committed both murders. The lab results were conclusive. Both women were killed by the same high-powered rifle. There was little doubt Alaska troopers were dealing with a serial killer. While they began their hunt for him in the wilderness, the Anchorage police were dealing with their own problems. Every city has its dark side, and Anchorage is no different. Except that in Alaska, the nights are longer and darker. In the 70s and 80s, Anchorage was a frontier town. Men came here to work hard, and women followed to ease their loneliness. Some women were lured to the strip clubs, hoping to earn a quick buck. Others, looking for more respectable opportunities, worked in the clubs until something better came up. For many, it never did. And in the city's streets roamed a stalker. He chose carefully. His victims were hardly missed. For in a city made up largely of strangers, it's difficult to be a missing person. Some of the women who disappeared from Anchorage turned up safely. Some didn't turn up at all. But disappearances weren't the only crimes being reported. On the early morning of June 13th, 1983, Cindy Paulson, age 17, ran down an Anchorage highway. She was partially dressed and in handcuffs. She managed to flag down a passing truck. She was running for her life. The motorist dropped her off at her motel apartment. The desk clerk had called the Anchorage police.
Miss Paulson?
An officer removed her handcuffs and tried to calm her.
You all right? Here, let me get this.
Anchorage police officer Greg Baker recalls the incident.
We found her in handcuffs with very little clothes on. She was real credible. She was very scared, she's very frightened, and she told us her story.
Paulson, the prostitute, told Baker that she picked up a trick the night before. She described him as wiry, scruffy, about 6 feet tall, with glasses and a stutter. He was not the kind of person she thought of as threatening. But as soon as she stepped into his car, he handcuffed her and put a wood-handled revolver to her head. They drove to a respectable residential neighborhood. He pulled her into his house. The place was well kept and full of hunting trophies. He had a chain hanging from the ceiling of his den. He chained her up and stripped her. And there she was tortured and raped repeatedly for hours. Then he went to take a nap, leaving her there. But he wasn't through yet. He said he was going to take her to his cabin in the wilderness. He said if she tried to get anyone's attention, he'd kill her, and them as well. He told her he already had his alibi worked out. His friends were willing to lie for him. No one would believe her story. They ended up at the airport. She could see him loading a weapon into a small aircraft. She also saw her chance for escape. Her one chance to save her life. The story sounded outrageous, but her genuine terror compelled Officer Baker to check it out.
I had a very street-smart female, scared to death, with a story about being taken at gunpoint and held prisoner at a specific location that she described where it was, so she knew where it was. She described the interior of the location. She described the den, up to and including various animals were posted on the, mounted on the wall.
En route to the hospital for an examination, Paulson insisted on stopping at the airport to show police the airplane she had seen earlier. She positively identified it.
While we were in there, we had a security guard stop us and describe the car the same way that Cindy described the car, and in fact gave us a license number. That license number confirmed the address, or the area at least, that Cindy had given us regarding where the house was.
Police went to the address to speak to the owner of the car. They arrived moments before he pulled up, driving the vehicle described by Cindy Paulson. So far, everything Paulson said had checked out. But the suspect had his own story to tell. According to the motor vehicle records, the car that Cindy Paulson was abducted in belonged to Robert Hansen, a baker in Anchorage. Hansen, who fit the description of the man Paulson described, calmly answered questions. He said he was at a friend's house from 5 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., repairing a seat for his airplane. Afterward, he went to the home of another friend and stayed until around 5:30 that morning. Then he went to the airport and installed the seat. Hansen gave police his consent to search his house. Again, his home was exactly as Paulson had described. That only proved she'd been in the house, not that Hansen had raped and tortured her there. They could find no evidence of that. They did notice a loose-fitting wall panel. Behind it, they found a collection of weapons, but that wasn't surprising. Hansen was an avid hunter. They did find a revolver, but it didn't match the one that Paulson described. The gun, the chain, and the blanket she was wrapped in were nowhere to be found. Hansen's car appeared equally clean. Anchorage police found nothing in his car that fit Paulson's story.
Those alibis were corroborated and verified, and Mr. Hansen was released after a consent search of his house.
Paulson, still shaken from her ordeal, was able to pick Hansen's picture out of a photo lineup. But when given the chance to take a lie detector test, she refused. Her occupation gave her an inherent distrust of the police, and gave police an inherent distrust of her. She felt she'd never be taken seriously. Soon after, she left town for a while to try to put the nightmare behind her. Anchorage authorities were willing to let it drop too.
I found out because the alibis were corroborated and because they had a problem with Cindy Paulson appearing and disappearing, and of course her lifestyle left a lot to be desired, that the case had been suspended at the Anchorage Police Department.
Police had gathered no solid evidence linking her story to Robert Hansen. But for Officer Greg Baker, it wasn't over. He was one officer who believed Paulson's story and wouldn't let it go. The predator roaming the streets of Anchorage was still out there, free to claim more victims. Robert Hansen, the most likely suspect in the abduction and rape of Cindy Paulson, had been released for a lack of solid evidence. Officer Baker was still curious. Lately, the Anchorage police had been grappling with what seemed like more than their share of missing persons reports, involving prostitutes like Paulson, or exotic dancers, or women out by themselves. Paulson's assertion that she was about to be put on a plane only reinforced his creeping suspicions about Hansen.
He had taken her to the airport where he was going to fly her out with the story that if she maintained her helpfulness, that he'd bring her back and let her go. Well, Cindy was bright enough to know that she was on a one-way trip, and so was I. And so I kind of just put two and two together and figured that he was a very good suspect for the missing dancers.
Baker's supervisor had suspended the investigation into Robert Hansen, but Baker couldn't let it go. Cindy Paulson's nightmarish story had too much detail to not have some basis in truth. But no one except Baker would listen to her. He continued his investigation. On the surface, Baker found nothing in Hansen's record to arouse suspicion. He had moved to Anchorage from Iowa 16 years earlier and opened a bakery. It was a huge success. He had a wife and children, and except for his stutter, he fit in completely. When he wasn't in the kitchen, Hansen enjoyed flying his small airplane, a Super Cub Piper. Back on the ground, he took to the woods. He was a solid citizen. He just didn't fit the model of a serial killer. There were plenty of others drifting through Alaska more suited to that role. They didn't have businesses. They didn't have families. Hansen did. He had everything to lose. Frank Rothschild was a prosecutor involved in the Paulson case.
Bob the baker. The troopers and the police used to go to his donut shop all the time. It was a very popular place to go. He had a bakery. People knew him. He was friendly. He was just a hard-working guy.
Unaware of Officer Greg Baker's local investigation in Anchorage, state troopers were still trying to find their serial killer. Bodies continued to be unearthed in the Alaskan wilderness. Troopers set up a task force to study the similarities between the missing women and the murder victims. They hoped to find a common thread that would lead to a suspect. Until authorities knew more, they did their best to educate dancers and prostitutes about playing safe. For the first time, police and prostitutes were on the same side. According to Rothschild, the goal was preservation.
Law enforcement were then, and had been for a time, advising young women who were working in some of these clubs and who were working the streets to be careful, and to advise them there was a maniac out there who seemed to be abducting and killing people.
A little digging revealed that Hansen's criminal history was extensive. 12 years earlier, in 1971, he'd been arrested twice for kidnapping, rape, and assault with a deadly weapon. They were crimes that bore an eerie resemblance to what Cindy Paulson had endured. Baker couldn't bring this information to his supervisor. The Paulson case had been officially suspended, and Baker was bucking authority. That left him no alternative.
And at that time, I gathered up all the reports and background that I could find on Mr. Hansen and carried it over to the troopers.
When the troopers received the file from Officer Baker, they were optimistic. Paulson's testimony, along with Hansen's police record from Anchorage, made him a prime suspect in the state case. The troopers' investigation dovetailed with Baker's. They were both dealing with the same maniac. Robert Hansen was their best suspect.
I think everybody was looking at him real seriously because he made a good suspect when you looked into him. He had a pretty extensive criminal background, including some sexual assaults.
The only problem was the proof. Though Hansen was a violent sex offender, his record indicated nothing about being capable of homicide, nor was there any direct link from him to Sherry Morrow, Paula Goulding, and the other missing women. At this point, troopers didn't even have enough for a search warrant. They knew only that 3 women were dead and 12 were missing. Out there lurked a serial killer. Troopers needed to catch him before he killed again. They needed help.
We knew we had a mass murder on our hands. That was not something Alaska had any experience with. Somebody obviously knew that the FBI not only had experience with it, but had set out this unit that was designed specifically to try to assist in discovering who these people were.
To catch a killer in their own backyard, the troopers called on help from over 3,000 miles away. Only the FBI had the resources needed to get inside a killer's head. When the Alaska State Troopers determined they had a serial killer on their hands, they realized they didn't have the expertise to stop him. But they knew who did. Quantico, Virginia is home to the FBI's Investigative Support Unit. Here, agents attempt to predict behavioral patterns by analyzing a criminal's actions. Retired FBI agent John Douglas helped pioneer behavioral profiling and still works as a consultant. His profiles are based on 25 years interviewing convicted killers. They taught Douglas how to think like they do. He's learned that serial killers are acting out their fantasies of control and conquest. As Douglas slowly wins their trust, he takes them back to the scene of their crime.
You finally get them talking, they start giving you that 1,000-yard stare. They're back 10 years ago, 20 years ago when they were perpetrating the crime, and they kind of lock into that 1,000-yard stare, and their memory is just so precise. And the fantasy is what keeps them going over and over and enables them to survive when they're incarcerated. So I got to tap into that. It takes time, but once I'm in there, I get tremendous information.
From these interviews, he distilled a checklist of traits and habits that serial killers share. They start young, with lesser crimes such as arson or cruelty to animals. Over the years, their violence builds. To every new case, profilers bring the knowledge of how killers evolve.
To understand the criminal, you must look at the crime. You just want to see if you can come up with an analysis based upon preliminary police reports, crime scene photographs, a profile of the victim, autopsy protocol, reviewing that, review the autopsy photographs, do an analysis of the overall crime, the risk level that the subject took, the victim risk level, analysis of the area, maybe the crime scene, maybe you have multiple crime scenes, and then based upon that, you attempt now to come up with a specific type of profile.
By examining every aspect of an unsolved crime, a profiler can determine specific characteristics of that killer, such as age, occupation, and physical characteristics. The troopers contacted the FBI to see if the Bureau could work up an analysis of the Anchorage killer. They hoped the profile would sharpen the investigation and bring overlooked clues to light. The troopers gave the FBI what they needed to build the behavioral profile. For a scrupulous, accurate profile, they required only facts from the troopers, no analysis or theories. Trooper Wayne Van Clausen didn't want to lose any time. The information he received from Officer Baker aroused his suspicions about Robert Hansen, but he needed more information. Criminal records were just beginning to be computerized, and he didn't have access to them all in Anchorage. While the profile was being developed, he went to Juneau to collect Hansen's records from the Superior and Supreme Court archives. In his fact-finding mission, Van Clausen researched every town that Hansen had ever lived in. He found reports on Robert Hansen dating back to 1961. He gathered all that he could carry, sent the rest by truck, then headed home. While he was in Juneau, the FBI had come through with a criminal profile of the serial killer. The fact that the killer was so prolific meant to Douglas that he could function unnoticed within the community. Someone who worked independently, most likely a business owner. The killer would be an avid outdoorsman, since the bodies were recovered in remote areas of wilderness. Since he preyed on prostitutes, Douglas concluded the killer had difficulty talking to women, had low self-esteem, and grew up feeling like an outcast. Based on killers with similar profiles, Douglas provided a specific characteristic to explain the cause of those feelings of inadequacy, a feature that bore an eerie resemblance to Robert Hansen.
The one that totally blew us all away, I think, is that when they said he's either going to be a stutterer or someone who has a lisp, a speech defect. How do you figure that? But that was one of the things that they suggested might show up.
The FBI profile pointed to Robert Hansen, but the depths of Douglas's insight were about to be known. Upon Van Clausen's return, troopers studied the files. The records showed that Hansen had spent 3 years in a reformatory for setting fire to his old high school's bus garage. Based on their work with previous killers, the FBI profilers said the killer would have a history of arson.
You have a boyfriend?
Yes, actually I do.
Yeah, because
The profile painted the killer as a social misfit. Hansen's court-ordered psychiatric reports from his days at the reformatory bore this out.
Not boyfriend, girl.
I'm really busy right now, you know.
I don't mean anything like, I mean, you know.
His stutter was a social barrier that undermined his self-confidence. Whenever he tried to assert himself, he'd be slapped
I have a lot
down.
of work to do, or I'm gonna call security on you.
He never forgot the sting. The profile said the killer would learn to function as a normal member of society while his perversions festered within. His record showed that in his 30s, Hansen began working at a bakery. He would brag to co-workers about his kleptomania and the sense of power it gave him. He also bragged about his love of hunting. He took great pleasure in exerting power over his prey, stalking it, then wounding it. And he became good at the kill, winning prestigious awards. In 1967, he moved to Alaska to start a new life and for better hunting. 3 years after moving there, his record showed he was arrested for the attempted rape of a young receptionist at gunpoint. He pleaded no contest to assault with a deadly weapon. A little more than a month later, he was indicted for the attempted assault of an 18-year-old woman he'd followed home.
As soon as the man got to Alaska, he was involved in theft cases, he was involved in abductions, he had psychiatric evaluations showing him to be really unstable and having all kinds of weird sexual fantasies and the rest.
True to the profile, Hansen seemed a respectable citizen, so the courts were lenient. In one case, he claimed to have memory lapses and was given psychiatric treatment and 5 years in a work release program. He abducted one of his early victims outside a coffee shop, took her to a cabin in the wilderness, and raped her at gunpoint. She was 17 at the time.
He told me, of course, if I called the police, that he would hunt me down and kill me. He told me he was a fine, outstanding businessman. He had never mentioned at any point when during the rape time or before or after that he was married, but he said he's a fine, outstanding businessman and that I was just a kid and nobody would believe me.
And he was right. Everything the profiler said about the perpetrator of the serial killings fits suspect Robert Hansen, a truly dangerous man who was passing as a nondescript face in the crowd. While troopers zeroed in on Hansen, they spread out to search for more victims in the Knik River area, where 3 bodies had been found. They believed that the dancers who were still missing may have been buried close to the other grave sites. But troopers came up empty. The area was too large and remote to cover completely. Despite the compelling FBI profile and the past police records, troopers lacked anything tangible to link Hansen to the killings. His police records were too stale, the evidence too circumstantial to hold any weight in a court of law. Investigators hoped that Cindy Paulson could help. She was the only surviving victim to Hansen's current wave of violence. Perhaps she could remember something else from her ordeal. Paulson gave another statement, but this time she was able to ID one of the guns Hansen had in his possession. Aside from Paulson, Hansen had not been implicated in a rape or abduction for more than 10 years. But in the hopes of strengthening their case and establishing a pattern of behavior, investigators searched for another of Hansen's victims from years earlier, whose experience matched Paulson's. Although this prior victim no longer lived in the area, troopers tracked her down and asked for her help.
I had gotten a call from Alaska asking if I would like to maybe help with a conviction for Mr. Hansen. They had explained to me that he had killed, to the best of their knowledge, 7 women. And they explained to me that the last woman had broken free.
She agreed to testify when the time came, but troopers still had a weak case. Though troopers felt confident they were on the right track, they didn't have enough to prove that Hansen was a serial killer. According to Anchorage Police Officer Greg Baker, Hansen knew that authorities were onto something.
One morning I was driving by and I needed to get some donuts for the shift. Mr. Hansen was there, and he had a window that he stood in and decorated cakes and cupcakes and cookies. And I remember watching him. He kept looking up at me, and you could tell he was nervous. And he kept putting frosting on his thumb. And I liked that.
Although investigators had Hansen in their sights, they still lacked the evidence to connect him directly to the crimes. But because Hansen matched the profile so closely, Douglas flew to Alaska to review the case and to brief the troopers and prosecutor Frank Rothschild on how to proceed with the suspect. Douglas was confident that Hansen was their serial killer. The hunter was now the hunted.
So the mission was to provide a analysis for them. Does he have the capability to commit a crime like this? And the answer was yes. I believe this prostitute, and I believe he's capable of perpetrating these crimes.
Douglas's idea was to bring Hansen in for questioning while simultaneously searching his house. To obtain a warrant, investigators needed to list specific items they believed to be in the house. They knew to look for the gun that Cindy Paulson described, and the one that fired the bullets found in the graves of Sherry Morrow and Paula Goulding. That wasn't enough. They needed a home run, something that would prove Hansen's guilt in no uncertain terms. They asked Douglas if there was anything else to list in the warrant.
Yes, some of the research findings is we're dealing here with a serial killer. And serial killers, it starts off as fantasy. And one of the things to keep the fantasy going after the crime is because they're on the hunt nightly looking for victims, is they take some type of memento. We call them either souvenirs or trophies, something belonging to the victims.
Douglas helped prosecutors write the affidavit based on the likelihood of finding mementos mentioned in the profile.
Okay, anything else? I've got those two.
Anything from a piece of the victim's jewelry to a driver's license.
We don't have any.
But a behavioral profile had never been used as the basis of a search warrant in the United States before. Rothschild knew he'd need to back it up with more conventional information.
Obviously, the district attorney's office wanted this search warrant to be bulletproof. They wanted it to be absolutely, positively, without flaw, because they knew this was a big, big case. The last thing they wanted was to have something wrong with the search warrant and have all the evidence thrown out.
The affidavit swelled to 48 pages. The judge granted 8 search warrants for Hansen's property. Now, they just needed Hansen. They had learned his pattern, knew his schedule. On October 23, 1983, they went to pick him up at his bakery. But Hansen wasn't there. He'd gotten off to a late start, unwittingly keeping the troopers waiting 20 tense minutes.
Robert Hansen? Alaskan Police Department, will you step away from your car?
When asked to come in for questioning, he didn't resist. The interrogation room was ready for him. The goal was to keep him off balance, hoping to elicit a confession and avoid a lengthy legal case. Douglas helped the troopers design the interrogation room for the biggest psychological impact. Crime scene photos and related materials were strewn everywhere for Hansen to contemplate before his interview. At the appointed moment, the troopers arrived, and the mind game began.
Mr. Hansen?
The FBI coached Rothschild on how to play it.
Ask him questions in a way that would prompt more discussion. So that's game plan number one. Then obviously, we've got all of these cases that have been investigated. And to get him to talk specifically about those. He's trying to search us out. What do we know? So I could see his game plan was to kind of find out what we knew and play off of that. And my game plan, of course, is to find out what he knew.
While Rothschild tried to get Hansen to open up and confess, troopers served the search warrants. Hansen's wife was home. The troopers were extra cautious, videotaping the entire procedure. What they were looking for could be anywhere, even in plain sight. Hansen knew the troopers had access to his police and psychological records. He didn't tell authorities anything they didn't already know. He spoke of his painful upbringing, his strict family, his anger. He admitted to picking up dancers and prostitutes in the early 70s, and how enraged he became when they tried to raise their prices. But he denied threatening any of them. He admitted nothing. While Hansen told his story and his house was being turned inside out, other troopers headed to his bakery and to the airport to search his plane. Both were clean. The house became the focal point of the investigation. A careful search of the upstairs bedroom finally yielded a curious and eerie discovery. An aerial map of the region, peppered with 37 X's. They seemed to be clustered mainly around the area where bodies had been found. But there were dozens more marks than bodies, at least so far. The searchers continued up to the attic. Under insulation, the troopers found weapons. Among the items found were a .223 Ruger Mini 14 rifle, like the one used to kill Sherry Morrow and Paula Goulding, and a wood-handled revolver resembling the one described by Cindy Paulson.
Yeah.
The search team let Van Clausen know the good news.
Sounds good. These women look familiar? Have you ever seen them?
The net was closing on Hansen, and he knew it. But he wasn't ready to talk just yet.
Take another look.
The interview dragged on for hours. It didn't seem like a confession was likely.
I haven't. I've never seen it.
While troopers collected the evidence, the case unwound even further. Hansen's friend and neighbors stopped by, curious about the activity. She was stunned by the news, then made a confession that demolished the last of Hansen's story. She told troopers that her husband provided Hansen with his alibi on the night of Cindy Paulson's abduction. He'd lied to protect his friend, not realizing how serious Hansen's charges were. The husband later called police and retracted his statement. Hansen's alibi evaporated. As the search continued, the troopers found the most incriminating evidence so far. Evidence that Douglas knew had to be there somewhere. They found Sherry Morrow's necklace and other personal property belonging to the dead or missing women. They had found Hansen's stash of trophies.
Yeah, this is Baker here.
Investigators called the station. Though they had Hansen where they wanted him, still he wouldn't confess. But they had enough to lock him up on the Cindy Paulson case. Bail was set at $500,000. Investigators now had time to build their case against Hansen as a serial killer. They called the prior victim to see if she was still on board.
And at that time, they thought he had killed 11 women. And was I still interested in being a witness? They really felt that they may need me because he hadn't confessed.
All right, what you got?
3 points on the map found in his bedroom matched the locations of bodies recovered by the troopers. Another X marked the location of a body recovered by Seward police years earlier. The remaining X's presumably marked the graves of more victims, dozens of them.
Looking at the map obviously was pretty chilling because we believed the map. The map was a body count as far as we were concerned. The man had kept track. He didn't have newspaper clippings. He had the map.
When the troopers believed they had enough to convict Hansen on at least 4 murders, they confronted him and his lawyer with the evidence. Hansen couldn't refute it. He had no place left to hide. Finally, it was time to confess. Time for Hansen to cut a deal. Hansen said he would confess to the murders that could be proven, as long as the trial was given no publicity and that his family be left alone. He demanded that he be imprisoned outside of Alaska when the trial was over. In exchange for only 4 convictions, he agreed to show the troopers where more bodies were buried. Investigators called the prior victim to tell her the good news.
The third time they called back and said that he had confessed and they wouldn't need me. So I hung up the phone when we were done talking, got my son off to school, got my husband out the door, and proceeded to fall apart. I started crying. I couldn't stop. I had no control over it. It controlled me. I could see each and every one of those women, how they died, probably hunted down like dogs, wounded and then hunted more.
In his confession, Hansen described how he would take his victims into the woods and hunt them as prey. Over the dozen years that he lived in Alaska, he'd raped more than 30 women and developed many strategies for capturing them. Once he found a likely target, a solitary woman like Sherry Morrow, he would befriend her and arrange to meet her at a fast food place. If they were dancers or aspiring models, he'd offer to pay to photograph them. He'd arrive early and stay in his car. That way he'd be certain the woman arrived alone and had no one waiting for her in the parking lot. No witnesses. Then he'd go in and meet his new victim. One half of the handcuff was already fastened to the seat. Hansen boasted that snapping the other half onto his victim's wrist while reaching for his gun became like a reflex. Then he would take them home or to a remote motel to rape and torture them. Afterwards, he'd blindfold them and drive or fly them to the outskirts of town until he arrived at a secluded spot, his hunting ground. His habit was to toy with his prey before he made the kill. Hansen confessed that in the summer of '83, he devised what he called his summer plan. He sent his family away so he could bring his victims home. When he was done with them, he'd dispose of them in the wilderness. On February 27, 1984, Robert Hansen was convicted of murdering 4 women and sentenced to 461 years plus life with no chance of parole. After his sentencing, Hansen accompanied troopers into the field to find more of his victims, represented by X's on his map. A total of 8 victims were found. Some places on the map went unexplored. Bears scavenged others, scattering the remains. Investigators will never know how many of the 37 X's represented one of Hansen's victims. According to John Douglas, the map might have depicted only a small part of his hunting grounds.
Killers like Hansen will come into contact with a lot of women, but fantasy is everything, and they may not like the way the person talks or the person dresses, the style, and so they'll make a decision. Well, this one will live. This one over here will die. I believe he was good for a lot more cases, and I still believe there was a chance that one of the reasons that caused him to go up to Alaska he was running away from homicides back in the lower 48.
In the United States, an estimated 35 to 50 serial killers are active at any given time. Profiling has made them easier to spot and apprehend. Each time one is captured, investigators learn more about their twisted motivations, making it easier to catch the next one. Deep in the hills of Arkansas, an army of extremists plot to overturn the U.S. government. They spread a doctrine of hate, murder, and genocide. Launch death raids on churches and synagogues, bomb public utilities, and gun down a state trooper. Federal agents must dismantle the radical renegades without inciting a bloody war.
In 1984, a tragic murder led agents into the frightening world of domestic terrorism. Law enforcement vowed to dismantle the violent faction that claimed responsibility. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The radical group pursued a doctrine of racial cleansing, an attack on basic American freedoms. The FBI's quest for justice escalated into a brutal showdown, pitting agents against terrorists, fueled by hate.
June 1984, Sevier County, Arkansas, a rural area along the Oklahoma border. Winona Bryant drives south on US Highway 71. Winona is a teacher at a local high school. She's traveling with her children and her nephew to meet her husband for lunch. He is Lewis Bryant, an Arkansas state trooper. He patrols this stretch of highway. Along the way, Winona spots a police cruiser on the side of the road. She recognizes the ID number.
That's Dad's car.
Lewis is nowhere in sight. Something's wrong. Winona tells the children to stay in the car.
Stay in the car.
Then she sees him. Covered with blood.
Lewis? Lewis? Oh my God, Lewis! Oh God!
Winona struggles to stay calm as she uses the police radio to call for help.
Officer down! Officer down! Please, somebody! Officer down! Somebody!
She tells the dispatcher that Lewis is unconscious. It looks like he's been shot.
Just get somebody here! He's been shot! Please!
The Arkansas State Police dispatcher alerts all police frequencies that an officer is down.
Interstate 71 North. 2 miles north.
Passing motorists stop to help. Winona can feel a faint heartbeat, but her husband isn't breathing. She administers CPR until county authorities arrive. Paramedics rush Bryant to a nearby hospital, where he is pronounced dead. Trooper Lewis Bryant was a respected veteran of the Arkansas State Police. He leaves behind his wife, Winona, and their 2 children. Within minutes of the shooting, the DeQueen, Arkansas Sheriff's Department receives a frantic call. A driver on Highway 71 reports seeing a brown and white van leaving the scene. It was pulling a homemade trailer. Police in Broken Bow, Oklahoma spot the van heading west. The driver refuses to stop, but police force him to the side of the road. As officers converge on the van, the driver pulls out a rifle and starts shooting. Police strike the suspect in the shoulder. He pulls out a .45 caliber pistol and continues firing. Officers hit him 4 more times, finally forcing him down.
See your hands. Roll over on your belly.
Police search the wounded suspect and find a driver's license identifying him as Richard Wayne Snell of Stephenville, Texas. At a nearby hospital, police question Snell. The suspect confesses to shooting the state trooper. Snell tells police he has outstanding warrants in Texas and he was trying to escape arrest. As Bryant approached the car, Snell opened fire. Agents from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation search Snell's van. They discover a metal box containing a .22 semi-automatic pistol and a grenade.
Tell me something I don't know. Get a shot of that.
They also find suspicious wires attached to the underside of the steering wheel column, leading to the air conditioner vent.
We got wires going into the
They fear the van is booby-trapped. Investigators call in a bomb squad from the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. Technicians carefully examine the vehicle. After several tense moments, they conclude the van is not rigged to explode. The search of the vehicle resumes. Investigators find several more weapons, including a MAC-10 machine pistol. They also find literature printed by a group of white supremacists called the CSA, the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord.
You're labeling them all the same. So
The group advocates the violent overthrow of the United States government. In their literature, they call for the murder of government agents and the extermination of Jews and blacks. Police call in Agent Bill Buford of the ATF. Along with other federal investigators, Buford has been trying to establish a criminal case against the CSA for nearly 2 years. Looking for evidence, Buford makes a chilling discovery.
In the van was a briefcase. And in the briefcase was a lot of notes that this individual had put together, different maps. And one of the things that I noticed immediately was a map, apparently, of my house. The street it was on, the different houses that surrounded my place. And that caused me a little consternation, to say the least. It was later established that they had also been doing surveillance on a federal judge, a U.S. attorney, an FBI agent. For whatever reason, whether they just wanted to know where we lived or whether they were anticipating retaliation for some whatever, that's just left up to one's own imagination, I guess.
Buford examines the weapons retrieved from the van.
One of the things that came to my attention almost immediately was that the MAC-10 had a silencer on it.
The silencer is homemade but sophisticated. Bill Buford believes he has seen one just like it, confiscated just 3 months earlier. In early April, Missouri police caught 3 men stealing a flatbed trailer. In their possession were 3 .45 semi-automatic pistols, 1 sawed-off shotgun, and 1 MAC-10 converted to fully automatic with a homemade silencer. According to an informant, All three men are members of the CSA.
The two silencers looked exactly the same. And I felt like this might be a break if we could determine that these two silencers were made by the same people and were able to establish that they had come from the CSA compound.
5 days after the shooting, on July 5th, 1984, Trooper Lewis Bryant is laid to rest. The funeral is attended by then Governor Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and over 1,000 police officers. Governor Clinton makes the investigation of extremist groups a priority.
Is to set up a group comprising members of both districts under the chairmanship of Colonel Goodwin to work on these cases.
State and federal agents probe deeper into Snell's connection to the CSA. The murder weapon in the Bryant case was a .45 caliber Colt Commander. 18 months earlier, the gun had been stolen in a deadly pawn shop holdup in Texarkana, Arkansas. The owner had been shot 3 times in the back of the head. Ballistics analysis shows a bullet recovered from the victim had been fired by a .22 caliber Ruger. The same .22 Ruger found in Snell's van. According to records, the leader of the CSA purchased that Ruger 4 years earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Agents now have enough evidence to subpoena the leader of the CSA to appear before a federal grand jury on gun charges. Bill Buford heads to Mountain Home, Arkansas to deliver the subpoena to the CSA leader at his 200-acre compound. Informants and surveillance indicate that the compound is heavily fortified. Several structures dot the surveillance photos. Agents know the compound is inhabited by the CSA leadership and approximately 65 men, women, and children. They know little else.
Sentries out, about in front of it, stop us, do our check-in.
ATF investigators had become aware of the CSA several years earlier. The organization had evolved from a religious group into a violent right-wing militia.
When ATF began to really think that this was more than just a Bible study group was when we were aware of the large number of right-wing organizations that were coming in and doing the paramilitary training there.
About another 150 yards up.
According to informants, extremist groups such as the Aryan Nation, the Posse Comitatus, and the Order frequently visited the compound.
They're watching us tight, so...
A few low-level members of the CSA had been arrested for firearms violations. But the leadership of the group had always managed to evade prosecution for all but misdemeanor offenses. Buford hoped today would mark the beginning of the end for this dangerous organization. Agent Buford meets a man at the front gate who identifies himself as Kerry Noble, the group's second in command.
He went into the compound, and a short time later he came back and said, well, the leader of the group will meet with you, but only you, and you have to go down unarmed, and I have to search you to make sure you haven't got a gun on you.
Buford agrees to turn his weapon over to another ATF agent. He allows himself to be searched. He knows that going into the compound alone and unarmed is dangerous, but there's no other choice.
If one of the people that was working for me or one of the agents under my supervision had wanted to do it, I wouldn't have let him do it. But at the time, it seemed like the right thing.
The stakes are too high. The group is too dangerous. Buford needs to show the CSA that federal agents will not be intimidated. In Arkansas, State Trooper Lewis Bryant is gunned down during a routine traffic stop. Investigators discover weapons connecting Bryant's killer to a group of violent white supremacists calling themselves the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord.
grenade. Got another hand.
ATF agent Bill Buford enters the group's heavily fortified compound to deliver a subpoena, ordering the group's leader to appear before a federal grand jury. The ATF agent enters alone and unarmed.
It was kind of an awesome sight. At first glance, it looked like just a community there with a number of buildings. But as you looked closer, you saw that these buildings were all rock structures, very well made. If you looked closely, you could see that there were bunkers dug around the compound itself.
Buford confronts the CSA leader face to face.
I got a subpoena in my jacket.
I explained to him that I had a subpoena from a federal grand jury in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and that he would need to appear on the date on the subpoena.
The subpoena concerns weapons involved in the murder of a state trooper. Investigators have traced some of the weapons back to the CSA.
He asked if he would be arrested. I assured him that the grand jury appearance was all this was. It was not an arrest warrant, that he wouldn't be arrested.
The leader takes the subpoena.
Okay.
His men escort Buford out of the compound. When the CSA leader eventually appears before the grand jury, he denies knowing Richard Wayne Snell, the man who confessed to the murder of Trooper Lewis Bryant. He also claims no knowledge of how weapons traced to him ended up in Snell's possession. On November 1st, 1984, Richard Wayne Snell is found guilty of capital murder in the shooting death of State Trooper Lewis Bryant. He is sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. On the same day, Snell is charged with the murder of a pawn shop owner in Texarkana, Arkansas. In the winter of 1985, the FBI, the ATF, and the Arkansas U.S. Attorney's Office turn up the heat on the CSA. FBI Special Agent Jack Knox has developed a key informant who claims the CSA is involved in acts of domestic terrorism.
He outlined what he referred to as road trips, in which he and 2 other members of the CSA were assigned by the leader of the CSA to take in search of businesses or establishments to plunder, or Jewish establishments which they might attack.
According to the informant, 2 years before the murder of the Arkansas State Trooper, several CSA members had set fire to a Jewish community center in Bloomington, Indiana. The informant claimed that at about the same time, the CSA firebombed a church in Springfield, Missouri that welcomed gay members. He also claimed that 3 months later, the CSA attempted to bomb a major natural gas pipeline in Fulton, Arkansas, to disrupt supplies across the Midwest. They were unsuccessful. The pipeline was not damaged. But Assistant U.S. Attorney Steve Snyder could see a dangerous pattern emerging.
There were what appeared to be random acts of violence. After this individual talked, they no longer became random acts of violence. They became part of a plan to strike out against the United States and attempt to disrupt the activities of the United States and its citizens.
The CSA had evolved from a religious cult into a group of domestic terrorists that had declared war on the United States. In March 1985, a second informant, a former member of the CSA, provides more information about the organization. He gives details about firearms and explosives being manufactured and used by the group. He tells investigators there is a machine shop in the compound where the CSA makes grenades and silencers and illegally converts semi-automatic weapons to fully automatic. He also claims the group has obtained a powerful anti-tank rocket, commonly called a law. The FBI informant reports that the CSA is building an armored tank and that landmines have been placed around the perimeter of the compound. He also provides a laundry list of interstate offenses committed by the group, including transportation of stolen vehicles, mail fraud, and theft of government property. Based on the informant's statements, the U.S. Attorney pursues a warrant to search the CSA compound for illegal weapons and explosives. Assistant U.S. Attorney Snyder intends to use RICO, a federal racketeering statute, to prosecute the CSA. The statute enables authorities to arrest and convict leaders of criminal organizations based on a pattern of illegal activities.
The RICO statute carried a statutory maximum penalty of 20 years, as opposed to the weapons and firearms violations, which carried a lesser penalty. So it was a more severe crime.
If I can show you this bigger map, maybe
Investigators discuss how to best serve the warrant.
Again, this is the compound.
Bill Buford opposes a kick-in-the-door approach.
It was obvious to me that we were dealing with a very militant organization. They were not, in fact, going to just roll over. If we walked in and say, hey, we're the federal government, we're here to look at your compound, they weren't going to allow us to do that.
To reduce the risk of a violent battle, the FBI would employ the newly formed hostage rescue team to serve the warrants. The HRT was established in 1982 as a counter-terrorism unit to work both inside and outside the borders of the United States. In 1985, Special Agent Danny Colson is the commander of the HRT.
The HRT basically are assaulters. It's their job to go into a crisis point and neutralize terrorists and rescue hostages. But this was not that type of situation. These people were very well armed, they were very formidable, and we wanted to avoid a shootout.
Colson establishes a command post in nearby Branson, Missouri. The HRT is composed of 2 elite teams.
Basically, you had a sniper element and you had an operator element. The snipers were responsible for gathering intelligence to give cover to the operators, and the bulk of the team was made up of operators.
Agent Buford, who has been inside the compound, briefs Colson on the layout, the main gravel access road, the front gate, and where the property borders the shore of a man-made lake.
Now, this gate's gonna be very heavily
The first phase of the operation is a reconnaissance mission.
You cannot command and control a crisis situation unless the commander's done a recon. He has to go in and see the ground. He has to know what the structures are like, where they are relative to each other, and what the best avenue of approach to get there in the shortest period of time is.
Tonight, Colson and his team will be the uninvited guests of the CSA. In Arkansas, local and federal authorities believe an extremist group is involved in domestic terrorism. They call themselves the CSA, the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. The FBI's hostage rescue team prepares to enter the terrorists' heavily fortified compound.
Where the compound is or anything else, last chance.
HRT Commander Danny Colson briefs the reconnaissance team before they go in. The recon team's job is to gather intelligence on the group's infrastructure, its buildings, manpower, and weapons, while avoiding the CSA's armed patrols. ATF agent Bill Buford will act as the HRT's guide. He's been inside the compound and knows the layout.
I had been doing so much work on the CSA and had spent so much time in the woods out around the compound that I had a good idea of the terrain, the fortifications on the compound, and had drawn up a raid plan myself as to what I felt should be done in order to execute this safely.
FBI Special Agent Danny Colson knows the CSA is well armed and dangerous.
These individuals had assault rifles, they had night vision capability, they had an excellent communication system, they were well trained, they practiced their tradecraft, which means marksmanship.
Still, Colson has every faith in his team.
The HRT has excellent patrolling skills, and it was just a matter of relying on our training. You move very quietly, you move very slowly, you crawl on your stomach, you stop and you listen, you look, and you rely on your senses. We would send a person on point. He would scour the area and glass it with thermal imaging gear. You listen to the noise of the forest. If something interrupts that, you know that somebody's there that's not supposed to be.
The team spots CSA guards patrolling the compound. They're armed with assault rifles.
We finally signaled it was safe, and we moved the rest of the patrol in. And we sort of leapfrogged in and out. We had a rear guard to be sure that nobody came around behind us. The thing that was concerned most about, of course, is the law rocket. You don't have to be a real good shot with a law rocket to kill a lot of people. It'll take out a light tank or a bunker, fired into my perimeter, could have killed my agents.
The recon team finally makes its way to the main compound. CSA members, as well as their families, are asleep inside some of the buildings.
The assault team leader needed to know what the structures looked like in case we had to breach them. So you have the possibility that there could be a suicide pact with these people. And they might start killing their children. That's happened before, it's happened since then. And so we had to be prepared to go in there to rush in and save innocent lives.
From the reconnaissance missions, Colson now knows exactly how the CSA compound is laid out and what needs to be done.
Well, the thing that the recon really reinforced was that we don't want to assault these guys. I mean, if we had to, we could do it, but there would be great loss of life on their side and possible on our side.
The compound sits on over 200 acres of land. If Colson hopes to resolve this without bloodshed, he'll need a lot more men.
After we saw how expansive this facility was there, I knew that 50 men could not hold that perimeter.
Colson calls for an additional 200 FBI agents from field offices across the country. He needs to sneak them into the small community without tipping off the CSA. Knowing Mountain Home, Arkansas is famous for its sports fishing, FBI agents disguise themselves as fishermen. They check into fishing camps located along the river. The plan is to use fishing boats to approach the compound at its weakest point, from the lake. As agents prepare to move on the compound, Colson briefs Special Agent Clint Van Zandt of the FBI's hostage negotiation unit.
You've got about 5 options in any type of situation. You can contain, isolate, and negotiate. You can contain and demand surrender. You can use snipers, you can use tear gas, or you can use a direct tactical assault and just overwhelm them with manpower and firepower. In these last three, people die.
The decision is made to contain, isolate, and negotiate. Danny Colson is the point man on all three phases of the operation.
This man's using himself.
I came to believe rather quickly that the leader of CSA is not going to want to negotiate with a lower-ranking FBI negotiator. He's going to want to talk to his tactical equivalent. In this case, it's going to be Danny Colson.
And I wasn't comfortable with that. I'm a tactical person. I had been a sniper, and I'd been a SWAT team member and a SWAT team leader and trained as an operator. And I was not trained to be a negotiator. And I didn't know that I could pull that off. I'm much more comfortable going in after the guy than trying to talk him out.
But Van Zandt convinces Colson that he's the right man for the job.
I had viewed a lot of negotiations. I mean, every time a tactical team is deployed, a negotiator is deployed with them, so I'd seen it done. And basically, Clint Van Zandt taught me some negotiation strategies and techniques.
After 10 days of reconnaissance and planning, Special Agent Danny Colson and the FBI hostage rescue team are ready. Over 200 law enforcement agents prepare to surround one of the most dangerous and heavily armed outlaw militias in the country. In 1985, the FBI closes in on the CSA, a paramilitary organization in Arkansas. Members of the group are suspected of domestic terrorism and murder. Over 200 agents, led by the FBI's hostage rescue team, make their move. HRT snipers and operatives deploy across a lake that borders the compound. Their mission is to establish a rear perimeter. Additional HRT units fan out in the woods, flanking the main compound. The ATF, along with the Arkansas State Police and the Missouri Highway Patrol, set up roadblocks. Their job is to prevent any CSA supporters from entering or leaving the compound. Overhead, an FBI surveillance aircraft called the Night Stalker cruises at an altitude of 50,000 feet. The plane's onboard thermal imaging system monitors movement throughout the compound. FBI Special Agent Danny Colson.
You could see everything going on the ground. We saw CSA people standing and talking to each other in little groups around the compound. We could see every animal, every deer, every coyote, rabbits running around on the ground, which gave me a tremendous advantage because I could use this vehicle, this airplane, to help me set my perimeter. They could maneuver my people around listening posts. They could maneuver my people around patrols.
Colson directs the mission from a command and control vehicle near the front gate of the compound. Special Agent Clint Van Zandt, an FBI hostage negotiator, advises Colson.
It was very prudent to go in at night and to have them wake up the next morning and find that we had walked literally right up to them without them knowing it. We could have come all the way in, but we didn't do it because we want to resolve this peacefully.
HRT snipers surveil the compound from positions inside and near the main gate. Within 10 minutes, they report that 2 men are exiting the compound and approaching their position.
Sniper 1 to command post. Roger. Instruction, please. Have individuals coming out of the compound gate.
Stand by.
Standing by for instruction.
And I radioed back and said, do they know you're there? He said, no, they haven't seen us yet.
The sniper tells Colson that one man has an assault rifle, the other has a sidearm.
Go back inside. Individuals getting closer, command post. Instructions, please.
Colson instructs his men to confront the CSA guards.
I said, you hail them You yell at them and tell them you're the FBI and tell them to go back inside.
You copy. Tell them to get back inside the compound.
The message it sends is that we could have got you, but we chose not to do it. Basically, we are here in force, but we come in peace.
FBI, back in the compound, now! FBI, get back in the compound! Move, move! Move, move!
I wanted them to get in the habit of following my orders or the orders of my team, and to show them that we weren't there to hurt them.
We're hearing from the tactical agents that there are lights, that there are activities within the compound.
We'll go with you.
No, you better stay back here.
Moments later, another man walks out of the compound.
Who's out here?
I instructed them to let him get close, and I wanted 2 operators to take him into custody.
FBI, freeze! Don't move! Freeze!
I didn't order him back in because I wanted to start the dialogue. It's time to talk now. Sometimes one of the most difficult things about a standoff situation is finding somebody to talk to. You don't always get them to talk to you initially.
The man identifies himself. He's Kerry Noble, the deputy commander of the CSA.
The first thing I said to him is we need to start a dialogue and talk about resolving this thing peacefully. We're not here to hurt anybody, but you're not getting out. And if you start a war, we're going to end it.
Noble says he will convey the FBI's request to talk with his commander. At daybreak, federal agents and local police have completely surrounded the compound. The news media somehow gets hold of the story and converges along access roads. Agents establish a direct telephone line into the compound. A short time later, Agent Colson receives a call.
The operator called me over and said, it's him, and it was the leader.
Yellow. That's right, I'm in charge of it.
And essentially said the same thing that I'd said to his deputy, is that this is the FBI, my name is Danny Colson, we have a warrant for your arrest.
And the only way it's going to happen...
The leader agrees to come out and talk on one condition:
Hold on, sir.
that he will not be arrested. Otherwise, his people will put up a fight.
Okay.
Colson agrees to the terms.
5 minutes. I'll see you then.
Van Zandt prepares Colson for the meeting. As an expert in behavioral science, Van Zandt believes the CSA leader will only respond to another commander.
As a military commander, I said, you wouldn't be carrying a long gun or rifle in this type of meeting, but you'd have your 9mm pistols. You'll meet his expectation as to what our FBI tactical commander should look like. He'll be more open to dialogue, more open to negotiations.
Colson approaches the main gate.
You should always look like you're in charge. But also, you have to bring him out. You have to get him to talk. It's not just you walk up and give demands, you get him to talk to you.
Tensions mount for a possible violent confrontation. FBI snipers train their sights on the CSA leader and his guards.
And you have to understand that this is a man who thought we were literally from the devil, that we were agents of the devil. So trying to create a bond of trust on a road with 2 armies facing each other with awesome firepower is a difficult thing to do.
Colson tells the CSA leader that the FBI is there to confiscate grenades, assault rifles, the law, anti-tank rocket, all illegal weapons stored in the compound.
And eventually...
I really didn't describe the forces. I just said, we're here, we've been here, we know what's going on in there, and at this point, I wanted to remain the faceless enemy. What I got from him was dialogue, which is the most important thing. But what I didn't get was capitulation. He didn't agree to do anything. He just agreed that they would go back in and pray about it.
Well, I respect that.
We'd agreed earlier if he came out that he could go back in. And that's very important. You have to keep that trust.
Colson and Van Zandt have no choice but to honor their agreement. They allow the leader to go back inside the compound. The first day and night of the siege passes without incident or resolution. On day 2 of the siege, the CSA commander requests another meeting. This time, he appears in full battle dress.
Changing clothing is a big deal. When the leader of CSA puts on tactical clothes, he's taking the presence of a tactical commander.
The leader of the CSA tells Colson that there are people inside the compound who are prepared to launch an assault and break out.
My patience was wearing really thin by this time. And I said to him, who are you going to fight? You've not seen us. You don't know where we are. We are going to use deadly force on you if you come out with weapons and come onto my perimeter. Who are you going to shoot? You haven't even seen us yet. How are you going to shoot us? It's like you're fighting ghosts, and you won't even know who kills you. You need to come out of there.
Now you get in there and convince them to get out of here right now.
The leader tells Colson he is prepared to come out, but he can't control everyone in the compound.
And he said to me, I need help. He said, there's a man that's our spiritual leader, and I need his advice, and I need his help to convince people that's the thing to do to come out. And I said, who is this? He said, it's Robert Millar.
Robert Millar is a well-known figure in the secretive world of right-wing extremists. It's an unusual demand. But to Van Zandt, it's a turning point in the negotiation.
This situation was either going to be resolved by bullets or it was going to be resolved by trust. Bullets or trust, what's it going to be?
For Colson, it is the moment of truth. He knows that if the shooting starts, there is no telling when it will stop. In the mountains of Arkansas, over 200 law enforcement agents surround an armed compound. Inside are a group of violent right-wing extremists, the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. The leader of the CSA demands to see Robert Millar, their spiritual leader. FBI Special Agent Danny Colson decides to use Millar to help persuade CSA members to leave the compound.
This is something totally against FBI policy, to bring in a Confederate into a crisis situation, not just to negotiate, but to go inside. And this is a huge risk. And I thought it was worth taking, given the risk that we were facing.
The FBI flies Millar in from Oklahoma. Special Agent Clint Van Zandt tries to convince Millar that it will be in the group's best interests if he helps bring the standoff to an end.
I said, you know, if you're able to do this, if you're able to resolve this peacefully, you'll be known as the peacemaker within your movement. I said, I don't say that to win you over. I say to tell you that you've got a lot riding on this. And you could see the wheels turning. It was at that moment I thought, he's flipped over on our side. He's on our side. He's going to do it. This was all the chips. We're saying, we're going to bet on this guy that he's going to drive home the message that Danny and myself and everybody else has been delivering for the last 4 days. Now, he's got to close the deal.
Quite a mess out here, it looks like.
And he called on the field phone. And Millar said, well, I'm in here talking to them, but I really haven't got anything resolved. They said, okay, you got another hour. Well, really, we couldn't control him. What were we going to do, go in and grab him by the neck and rip him out of that compound where there was 50 people with guns inside? So you had to be real careful of not, you will be out of there, because then it would have been apparent we were an empty suit. We were a paper tiger, and we couldn't be perceived as that. So it had to be, well, I really need you out of there in an hour. And he called back in an hour, and he said, I need more time with these folks. I think I can do it. I've got them coming along, but I need more time. And we just reconciled ourselves that he's going to stay there the night.
On the morning of April 22nd, day 4 of the siege, Millar and the CSA leadership exit the compound. For the first time since the beginning of the standoff, there are no armed men with the CSA leader.
They came out and they said, we have an agreement that we will surrender. We will come out and we'll give up our arms and walk out peacefully.
Colson receives the news with guarded optimism.
And I said to them, that's a great decision, but I want you to understand that this better not be a ruse for an escape attempt, because you will not survive it. This better be a surrender.
Colson gives the leader 15 minutes to gather his people and bring them out.
And very shortly after, I get a communication from a sniper team that they're coming. They're coming out. The snipers report that they're in civilian attire. There's no camis, there's no battle gear, there's no weapons they can see.
The siege is over. Not a single shot has been fired.
It was an ending that we had all prayed for, and one that we were very fortunate that we had.
ATF and FBI agents carefully searched the compound, accompanied by the deputy commander of the CSA, Kerry Noble. Over the course of several days, they recover hundreds of automatic weapons, homemade hand grenades, and landmines, as well as detonator boxes and plastic explosives. Agents find a Law anti-tank rocket near the leader's house. They find 30 gallons of cyanide stored inside steel drums. Agents believe the CSA intended to use it to pollute municipal water supplies. Investigators also find a steel-plated armored car equipped with a fully automatic machine gun. At trial, the leader of the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord is sentenced to 20 years in prison for federal RICO violations. Kerry Noble, the CSA's deputy commander, receives a 5-year sentence for firearm violations. Today, he speaks publicly about the dangers of hate groups and destructive cults. Richard Wayne Snell, already serving a life sentence for the murder of Arkansas State Trooper Lewis Bryant, is found guilty of murdering a pawn shop owner. He is sentenced to death. On April 19, 1995, at 9:16 p.m., Snell is executed by lethal injection. Today, the CSA compound is little more than a collection of abandoned shacks and stone ruins. A string of lethal carjackings terrorize the Washington, D.C. area. Ballistics reveal that it's the work of a serial killer who tries to run over one victim with his own car. The FBI and police set a clever trap, but the killer insists on a violent shootout.
In the early 90s, a serial killer stalked lone victims in the dead of night. His hunting ground, the suburbs of Washington, D.C. His target, anyone who owned a car. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The gunman was as elusive as he was deadly. He struck quickly and without mercy. Now the FBI must follow the twisted path of a killer wherever it leads.
November 13th, 1991. Silver Spring, Maryland, a suburb north of Washington, D.C. Montgomery County Police respond to a report of shots fired at a car dealership. Officers discover the body of a woman shot in the chest and forehead.
Call the medical examiner.
And another gunshot victim nearby.
It's got a pulse.
The man is breathing but unconscious. Paramedics rush him to the hospital. Montgomery County Homicide Detective Ed Day coordinates his department's swift response to the slaying.
You saturate the case as fast as you can, work on it as fast as you can, get as much information as fast as you can, and try to resolve it as fast as you can. Unfortunately, the homicides, time is terrible. The more time goes by, the less your odds are that you're going to have a satisfactory conclusion to the investigation.
Investigators learn the two victims are janitors. They were cleaning the building that night and would have come outside around 10 p.m. to dump the garbage. The detectives work to determine a motive for the attack.
You don't overlook the obvious. You have a shooting like this at a car lot. Is that a possible motive for the killing, the theft of a car? Of course, had representatives from the auto dealer come out, do an inventory. There was no vehicles missing. There was no property missing from the inside of the establishment.
Investigators locate the victim's car keys nearby and determine neither of their personal vehicles are missing. Robbery does not seem to be the motive.
Nothing was taken. They had money on them. There wasn't a single thing missing.
Are you Mr. Escobar's attendant physician?
Yes, I am.
Tell me,
With almost no evidence to go on, Detective Day hopes to learn more from the critically wounded man.
As you can see, he's intubated. He's also in a coma, and he's just not responding.
We do that with any kind of a shooting that's potentially fatal. There's a rule in law that a dying declaration does not have to be corroborated. It's not hearsay because if the person knows he's going to die, he's assumed to be able to be telling the truth. So if you can get a statement from somebody in really serious circumstances, and it's always a very, very powerful piece of evidence.
I got to check on it.
But the victim dies 9 days later without ever regaining consciousness. During the autopsy, the medical examiner recovers the only piece of physical evidence, the bullets that killed the victims. At the Maryland State Police Crime Lab, ballistics expert Joe Capera examines the evidence to determine if there was more than one shooter.
There was a microscopic comparison done to determine if these bullets were fired from the same gun. And indeed, as a conclusion to these examinations, I concluded that these bullets were fired from the same gun.
Examining the scratch patterns on the bullets, Capera determines the make and model of the murder weapon.
I was able to ascertain, first of all, the caliber of the gun, which was a .357, and then through the measurements of the unique landing groove areas, I was able to ascertain that it was a Ruger .357.
With no obvious motive for the slayings, detectives explore the victims' personal lives for clues.
You work inside out, you try to find out if these people had any enemies, if there was any triangle, thwarted lover or something like that. These things take you in 100 different directions, and you just have to You have to take care of one thing at a time. You eliminate something and you move on to the next issue, and you just go from there.
Detectives find nothing in the victims' backgrounds that could have led to their murders. Since investigators found the victims' car keys near the bodies, they decide to re-examine the slayings as a failed car theft. With that possible motive in mind, detectives speculate how the crime might have occurred.
They were cleaning. The business was closed for the night. They were taking the trash out.
Hey! Nice and easy, just throw me your
Detectives suspect the gunman demanded the victim's car keys.
The keys.
Here, they're right here. Don't hurt me, okay?
Based on the position of the woman's body relative to her keys, they believe she tried to run.
And you have to make the assumption that he lost control of the situation and decided to kill the two of them before he identified what car belonged to them. He escalated an attempt theft into a murder for no good reason.
With little evidence to go on, the case grows cold. Then, 3 months later, investigators respond to the scene of another homicide. They find the body of psychology professor Dr. Shaheen Hastrudi lying in a parking lot in Bethesda, Maryland. Unable to locate her car, detectives believe she was the victim of a fatal carjacking. Noting the lack of blood spatter evidence near the body, they suspect Hastrudi's assailant shot her while she was still inside her car. Through interviews with her colleagues, authorities determined Dr. Hastrudi left her office around 8 p.m.
She's obviously accosted. At some point gets in her car.
Get in the car! Start it. Just start the car. Start the car. Start the car. Don't touch her.
Once she's already in the car, she's shot. She's taken out of the car, dumped on the lot, and the suspect steals her car. Gunshot wound to the head, large caliber, no witnesses.
The only solid evidence is a pair of bullets recovered from the victim's body. Investigators send the bullets to the Maryland State Police Crime Lab to compare them with the bullets from the double homicide. It is a match. The two crimes are connected.
We got a couple of crimes here.
Homicide detectives begin examining unsolved cases involving similar circumstances. One detective recalls a recent homicide which occurred a month before Hastrudi was killed. That victim was also shot in the head with a large caliber gun. As in the Silver Spring double homicide, responding officers found the victim's keys near his body. But this victim didn't own a car, which leads investigators to question whether car theft was the motive, or if the case is even connected to the other shootings.
But we said, you know, this is looking like they're definitely linked for some reason.
Let's see if we can get some ballistics on it. Let's get some ballistics on it.
So authorities locate the bullet from that case and send it to be tested. Ballistics expert Joe Capera compares the bullets from the 4 homicides.
I did a cross-comparison examination to the previous bullets. And as a result of that examination, I found out that all the bullets were fired from the same weapon.
So we're starting to see a pattern here, guys. We got
Investigators have connected the 4 homicides through the ballistic evidence and an apparent car theft motive, but they cannot understand why the killer chose to murder his victims.
None of these people were armed. Stature-wise, none of these people I thought were particularly a threat to the suspect. 2 possibilities: that he had lost control of them and felt the best way to regain control of the situation was to kill him, or there was some psychological reason that he didn't like these particular people.
Detectives believe they are dealing with an extremely violent and unpredictable criminal and suspect he may still be in the area.
Montgomery County was his basis of operation. That's where he felt most comfortable. That's where he did all his murders. That's where he did his most risky business. That's where he laid in wait for people. So it was obvious he had some strong tie to Montgomery County.
Investigators suspect he will strike again and hope to stop him before he does. But they have no clues that can help identify him.
These are looking fantastic.
And the killer's weapon is the only thing that can connect him to the murders.
The best evidence we got is the bullets. And if we can get him and get the gun, then we definitely have a very, very strong case.
Now this one came out of...
Authorities don't want to give the killer a reason to destroy his gun, and with it their only evidence. So they decide to keep the ballistics match away from the media.
If we supplied the information to the press that all the bullets came from the same gun, be a good likelihood that he would either dispose of the weapon, or he would, in worst case scenario, obtain a different weapon and keep committing the crime.
More than a week after the Hstrudi killing, a man wearing a stocking mask and latex gloves robs a bank in Chantilly, Virginia. The bank's video security system captures his image. A witness tells the FBI that the bank robber fled in a late-model white vehicle and gives them the license plate number. The description of the getaway car matches the vehicle stolen from Hstrudi, attracting the attention of Montgomery County detectives. But the license plate is not Hstrudi's. Investigators trace the plate and discover it had been stolen from a vehicle in Annandale, Virginia. For detectives, this leaves open the possibility that Hstrudi's car was used in the bank robbery. The Montgomery County Task Force, which now includes agents from the FBI, requests copies of the bank's surveillance tapes to learn what they can about the robber. Investigators watch the crime unfold and notice the robber is carrying a revolver of the same make and caliber used in the 4 homicides. They think he could be the killer. The footage is the best lead they have in identifying a suspect, according to FBI Special Agent Robert Coffey.
We had a great piece of video that actually showed the individual, the handgun. That picture was actually put on the news locally and regionally to try to see if we could spark some interest as far as someone identifying him.
Investigators also release information that their suspect, the money he stole, and the vehicle he was driving may be covered in red dye.
If you do anything, a phone call, anything, I'm gonna shoot somebody.
The teller managed to slip dye packs into the bag of money. And a dye pack is a device that once it goes through the door of the bank, it's electronically activated. There's a timer on it that gives a person a little bit of time to get away from the bank, and then it explodes, spewing this terrible red dye. It stains. It's very difficult to get off. It gets on the money, and it will not come off the money. It takes a while to get it off you personally.
5 days after the bank robbery, police in Northern Virginia find an abandoned car bearing the stolen plates reported by the witness. A check of the vehicle identification number proves that it is Astrudi's car. The officer peers inside, examining the interior.
We had the red dye stains in it from the dye packs from the bank. We had proof positive that it had been used in the bank robbery.
Officers impound the vehicle and transport it to the police garage for processing. Technicians find bloodstains inside the car and collect samples as evidence. But they do not find anything that can identify the killer. Lab examiners extract DNA from the blood evidence and compare it to Astrudi's. It is a match. Finally, investigators are able to look at the various crimes and understand their suspect's overall plan.
It's gelled into something that makes a little bit of sense. You went from a situation where you had a whole bunch of motives that really didn't make sense to now a concrete motive. This person is killing people to steal cars to commit bank robberies.
Although authorities now understand why the suspect is murdering innocent people, they have no clue who he is. Investigators face the nearly impossible challenge of identifying and catching a ruthless gunman before he kills again. The FBI and Maryland's Montgomery County Police are hunting a killer who has already committed 4 homicides, as well as a bank robbery. Several FBI agents are part of the task force pursuing the gunman, including Special Agent Robert Coffey.
One of the main roles of the FBI, specifically in this type of a crime, is that we work with many different agencies to corral all of the investigators and bring forth the information in one kind of a think tank.
This multi-agency approach is an invaluable investigative resource for Montgomery County homicide detective Ed Day.
When you start working with multiple jurisdictions on different cases, well, the more jurisdictions are involved, the more jurisdictions have an interest, the more assets you can draw from.
The task force now understands their suspect's crime pattern. He steals a person's car at gunpoint, killing his victim, then uses the vehicle in a bank robbery. Investigators continue to look for past unsolved cases that involved a similar pattern.
Nothing occurs in a vacuum. Somebody doesn't just start killing people, so that's when we really started doing the research.
They identify an incident that occurred in their county almost a year earlier.
Is this your car? No, it's not my car.
Our victim was a maintenance man, an Hispanic male.
Give me your keys.
He was accosted by a white male carrying a large caliber dark handgun.
Where's your car?
When the masked gunman asked for the victim's car keys, the man claimed he didn't own a car.
Oh, no.
The suspect demanded to know which car belonged to him. He was told to turn around and face away from the suspect, get down on his knees, and put his hand behind his head.
Where's your car? Where's your car?
Our victim at that time felt quite certain that he was going to be executed.
This better be your car.
The suspect fired 3 shots. One of the shots hit him in the forearm.
The victim managed to flee down an alley and hide behind a bush.
And spent some minutes there waiting for the situation to calm down.
After 10 minutes, the victim returned to the street and waved down the first car he saw, hoping for assistance. To his horror, it was the gunman. An alert neighbor had called police. The victim's life was spared. The following day, a witness reported seeing a masked gunman leaving the scene of a bank robbery in Centerville, Virginia. Police later recovered the getaway vehicle and determined it was the car stolen from the maintenance man. Investigators examined the evidence gathered at the scene of the carjacking. All they have is a bullet fragment that was lodged in the victim's arm. Ballistics expert Joe Capera.
One does not necessarily need the whole bullet as long as the fragment that is left that he is examining has enough ballistic evidence on it that he can use.
He tests the fragment against the other recovered bullets to determine if that case is connected to their current investigation. The bullet fragment matches, but the task force is still no closer to identifying their suspect.
The lab's not getting anything out of these. I mean, these cars are...
With little hard evidence, investigators study the killer's behavior as exhibited through his actions, searching for clues to his identity.
This guy...
Authorities examine the newly linked case and determine he is unusually bold and cocky.
When the investigators got together and discussed the commitment level of this individual to stay at a crime scene for 10 minutes waiting for a witness to come back, raised our level of concern about the subject himself.
He's not in a big hurry. He feels pretty comfortable that the police aren't going to be there anytime soon.
Investigators also believe the suspect has a quick-tempered, vengeful personality.
He's very upset with his victim. He's decided that he has been himself wronged in some way, and he's going to make him pay for it.
But authorities cannot understand why the suspect uses what appears to be an unnecessary level of violence during the carjackings.
It does not make sense to kill somebody in the least risky part of the crime. The biggest risk he's taken is when he goes into those banks, as far as getting captured, being identified, or running into any real obstacles. Taking these people, innocent people off in the middle of the night in a ground of his own choosing where he can isolate them. I mean, he's safer at that location than he is at anywhere else and anything else he does. It just doesn't make sense why he chose to kill these people.
Their suspect is not only dangerously disturbed, but also clever.
One of the more interesting parts of the MO that this individual used was the number of jurisdictions through which he perpetrated his crimes.
He exploits the fact that no single police department can readily see his entire crime pattern.
We have a carjacking in one jurisdiction. We have a stolen tag from a second jurisdiction. We have a bank robbery in a third jurisdiction. And then we have the car abandoned in a fourth jurisdiction.
The gunman's efforts to stymie police do not stop there. Each time he abandons a stolen car, he leaves it unlocked with the keys in plain view.
One of the difficult parts of recovering the vehicles following the robberies is that they were being driven by other people. By leaving the vehicle with the keys in it, the vehicles were then subsequently restolen. Leaving the vehicles to be restolen destroyed whatever forensic evidence would have been left behind. So the only thing we had to match all of the crimes was the forensic evidence from the ballistics.
Investigators continue to look for additional unsolved carjackings in which the vehicle was later used in a bank robbery. They identify a case that occurred within miles of the other thefts.
A woman was walking out of a doctor's office and realized that she was being followed. She turned to try to go back to the doctor's office, but was confronted by the individual and then asked for her keys. They walked over to the car.
Come on, come on, come on.
Start it. Start the car. Start
The
the
gunman
car.
forced the frightened woman to start her car.
And upon starting the vehicle, had her get out and kneel down next to a wall.
No. On your knees. Put your hands up. There you go.
Upon kneeling down, he had her wait there for a short period of time.
She described it as 30 or 40 seconds passed. You have to wonder is how much of that time did he spend thinking about whether or not he was going to shoot her. She was very compliant, did everything she was told to do right when she was told to do it. That might have saved her.
The next day, her vehicle was used in a bank robbery. The investigators wonder why their suspect allowed this woman to live, yet killed the others. They come up with several theories.
The fact that she was a Caucasian female might have had something to do with it. He might have had harbored some malice towards Hispanic people or foreign people, or it could be something simple about he lost control in those situations. In fact, the best way to gain control was to kill him.
The task force has little to work with, but is determined to go on the offensive.
Now we're trying to figure out how can we get ahead of him? How can we be in a position where we can be waiting for him when he does something? Or we can be prepared to mobilize very quickly with the resources necessary to get him.
The investigators focus on the one aspect of the suspect's crime pattern that they can anticipate.
We could not predict when a carjacking would take place. They were too random. We did, however, know that following the carjacking, we would have a bank robbery.
If authorities can only predict which banks he will rob or where he will be traveling, they might have a chance to catch him. A masked gunman strikes again and again in suburban Maryland, just north of the nation's capital. He shoots his victims while stealing their cars. Which he later uses to rob banks.
Hey guys, I got some photos of the bank.
In the spring of 1992, the FBI and Montgomery County Police analyzed their suspect's habits in hopes of trapping him.
Identify why this guy's picking these banks. Go ahead and stick him up on the
Homicide Detective Ed Day.
We had people take aerial photographs of every crime scene and the different escape routes and things of that nature, trying to find some logical pattern to what he was doing, something that would maybe give us a clue. What are consistencies? What are inconsistencies? Is there anything like that that we can use to our advantage to foretell what he might do next?
On the surface, the list of crime scenes appears random. But a closer look by investigators reveals all the banks he robbed share a single trait.
Everywhere he went, he had access to a major roadway that would take him pretty quickly to a thoroughfare like 495 or 270 or something like that.
The task force shifts their focus from predicting where the suspect will strike next to catching him when he makes his escape after a bank robbery. They decide they will cast a dragnet on all highway exit ramps in the area. FBI Special Agent Robert Coffey.
So we developed a plan where we would cast a net using all of the jurisdictions, law enforcement within the Washington area, to where once the bank robbery were to take place, he would have to pass through some points of the net.
Meeting with officers from every police department in the area, the task force details their plan. They will watch for any carjacking reports resembling their suspect's MO. Officers from each jurisdiction will then prepare for a quick response if a bank is subsequently robbed. They will immediately stake out pre-assigned highway exit ramps targeting the stolen car.
Once he's carjacked the vehicles, we're going to implement the plan.
There was enough support at each particular location that he could be followed. We could bring to bear enough additional manpower to make a stop of our choosing and, of course, effect an arrest if we were lucky enough to spot him.
Ready to cast their net, investigators wait for the suspect to steal a car.
You're all key players in the plan. Let's get them.
At 5 a.m. each morning, Special Agent Coffey begins his day by reviewing the reports of all the area car thefts from the night before. He looks for the one that matches their suspect's MO.
Take a look at it.
If the suspect stole a car, the task force needs to identify it before banks open at 9.
Take a look at it.
But months pass with no sign of their suspect. Investigators begin to worry that the killer has gone underground and may never be caught.
We assume he's obviously stressed at this particular point. He's feeling the heat of the notoriety of what he's done.
October 9th, 1992.
Special Agent Coffey.
8 months after the killer's most recent slaying.
I get notification from our Baltimore agents that another carjacking has taken place. We've got a white male with a ski mask, latex gloves, and a handgun. It's taken place all the way up in Baltimore.
At approximately 7 a.m., a 15-year-old girl walked to her mother's car. Suddenly, an armed man approached her and demanded the keys.
Officer heard this and came to her aid.
Get away from the car! Get away from the car! Get away from the car! Get away from the car!
There was an exchange of gunfire. And the carjacker took her vehicle and fled the scene.
We were feeling very good because we had very, very fresh information, and we knew he was on the move, and he was in Baltimore and more than likely on the way back here.
The task force determines there is no need to wait for a bank robbery.
Based on that information, the task force casts the net around the Washington metro area, hoping that he's going to come back through that net.
Patrolmen and SWAT units from jurisdictions throughout Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Northern Virginia race to prearranged locations on freeway exit ramps to watch for the stolen car. Since police cannot be sure if the suspect has had time to switch the license plates, they pull over every vehicle matching its description. Each time, they know they may face a shooter who has already taken 4 lives.
Let me see your hand. See your hand. Driver, walk back. Driver, open the door slowly.
The FBI and police departments throughout the Washington, D.C. area hunt a suspected killer. They stop every vehicle matching the description of the one they believe he stole an hour earlier. Police pull over dozens of cars, but come up empty.
What's going on?
You got a girl.
As the search continues, 50 miles away in western Maryland, Brunswick police officer Gary Klein is on routine patrol.
I observed a small black and color passenger vehicle. I saw that there was no front license plate on it. And as the vehicle passed me, I looked over and observed the driver had a nylon stocking pulled down over his face. Kind of shocked me, and I was like, not really sure what's going on here, but kind of drew my attention real quick. I turned around, caught back up to the car, radioed my dispatchers and the 911 center, requested information on the tag. And the subject in the small black car sped off and wouldn't pull over for me. Then I'm informed by our dispatchers that this subject is wanted for shooting at a Baltimore City officer.
The hundreds of officers mobilized in the D.C. area are too far away to assist. Officer Klein is alone against a ruthless killer.
The adrenaline's pumping now because I'm pursuing this vehicle, knowing somewhere in there I'm going to have to confront this individual. The speeds that we maintain in some places were 90 mile per hour to a little over 100 mile per hour.
Officer Klein chases the suspect from Maryland into Virginia.
He was very intent on getting away from me.
Dispatcher, we're getting ready to go right on Interstate 71.
He just went straight down the middle of the bridge, just forcing people east and westbound out of his way. I had to back off because I didn't want to endanger myself or the innocent people or citizens out on the street, where he was actually able to gain a good bit of distance on me. But once the roadway cleared up a little bit where I could safely get through the vehicles, I was able to catch back up to him.
Klein pursues the suspect into West Virginia.
Made a right off Route 340, and he went down this small asphalt road, and when he hit that, he was going too fast with the rain and everything and lost control and struck the curb. Stepped out of the vehicle with my weapon drawn, and I seen him kind of lean over in the car towards the passenger seat, and I seen the gun come up inside the car.
Officer Klein is concerned about firing his gun in a public place.
When you discharge your weapon, you just don't want a round just going out there somewhere, and you could strike somebody innocent. You have a split second to make this decision, and whatever decision you make can affect you for the rest of your life. At that point, he placed the car in reverse and sped backwards quickly towards my cruiser in what I believe was an attempt to ram my car or strike me. He proceeded down a small access road, and I proceeded after him. He sped into this little dead-end dirt gravel area, and he tried to go behind this bulldozer and wrecked into it. There's nowhere for him to go, and now I have to confront him. At that time, I see the gun coming up, which just kind of made my heart jump out of my chest.
While the suspect ducks for cover, Officer Klein strategically moves to his right.
You don't want to stay in one position, especially after he already knows where you're at.
Klein's tactic works. The suspect fires at the position where Klein used to be.
I actually fired more shots at him as he ran to get to the backside of his car for cover.
With backup units still minutes away, the lone officer fights to stay alive in a violent face-off with a vicious killer.
Let me see him.
The suspected killer is in a desperate shootout in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, with lone police officer Gary Klein.
I see him start to come up from behind his car through the passenger side window with the gun raised, and he's coming up. I remember firing at him and striking the car, and he ducked down behind the car again. Several seconds passed. He raises back up. You can hear it, the actual sound of the bullet striking the car, the metal, and he ducks back down behind the car again.
Finally, backup arrives.
When they put their hand on my shoulder and I knew who they were, it was this big relief. Burden was lifted off my shoulders because now I knew I had fellow officers there. Within the next 10 minutes, police officers from several jurisdictions were on the scene.
Come out from behind the car!
The gunman realizes he is outnumbered.
Then the suspect stood up and walked out in front of myself and my cruiser, probably about 15 yards, and put the gun to his head. And I continued to yell at him to drop the gun, to throw the gun on the ground, at which time he told me he wouldn't do that.
Listen, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute.
West Virginia State Police Corporal John Jeffries begins negotiating with the gunman.
We can work through this. Let me help you. The only thing we've done so far.
After several minutes of negotiation, the suspect then pulled the nylon stocking up on the top of his head. Still wasn't able to really get a good, clear look at him.
The suspect begins to talk. He says he's an unemployed house painter.
He said that he was just upset. He had had some relation problems with his girlfriend, that he had done some things he wasn't real happy about, and just all these things had piled up and just troubled him, and he didn't know why he was doing the things he was doing.
After a 45-minute standoff, the gunman makes an unusual demand.
I remember him saying he wanted to talk to his mother. So he gave his mother's name and phone number.
Several tense minutes pass as police attempt to reach the suspect's mother.
He advised the suspect that they had his mother on the phone.
The woman on the line asks the negotiator for the suspect's name.
He identified himself as Alan Newman. He wasn't real sure of the police. He didn't know if we were just lying to him or what we were doing. He said, well, ask my mom what my favorite cookie is. I remember Corporal Jeffries saying, your mom said your favorite cookie is chocolate chip. And he started crying. It really shocked me because I thought he was just going to drop the gun and give up. You see the hammer coming back and everything's like slow motion. You see the hammer drop, you're waiting for the gun to go off. And it didn't.
Seizing the opportunity, officers rush in and subdue the gunman, ending the standoff.
After it was all over and done, very relieved, very appreciative of all of the guys that were there that day. I was able to help to get this person off the street and put him where he needed to be so that nobody else would be hurt.
Police take Alan Newman into custody and confiscate his Ruger 357 as evidence. It is the same model used in the murders, according to FBI Special Agent Robert Coffey.
From the prior ballistics, we knew what type of gun it would be. It would have been a specific Ruger make, and in fact, that's what he was carrying. The same types of bullets that were used in the shootings and the homicides were, in fact, still in the weapon.
You have told us that over and over.
After nearly a year of hard work, investigators finally meet the killer face to face.
We no longer have someone running throughout the counties killing people for cars. We were very excited about getting the chance to talk to the individual to find out why.
Go ahead, take it. While Newman admits to the Baltimore carjacking, he refuses to admit to any of the murders, according to homicide detective Ed Day.
You don't have anything on.
Throughout the interview process, he remained pretty cocky, and he thought he was pretty cool.
Investigators continue to press Newman. While at a firearms laboratory, a ballistics expert fires Newman's gun into an 800-gallon tank of water. The examiner compares the unique markings on the fired bullet to those on the bullets recovered from the 4 murders and the attempted homicide. Ballistics expert Joe Capera.
It is a scientific certainty that this is the firearm that fired these bullets, and no other firearm could possibly do that.
You want to hear it again?
After hours of interrogation, investigators receive the ballistics report.
That's like the magic piece of evidence, and that's the one that you really knew would seal the whole case. We had physical, undeniable evidence that we could put in front of a jury that he could not refute in any way, shape, or form. We could convict him without much trouble, and we could have gotten the death sentence with the information that we had, which put it over the top, and he decided it was best to make a deal for life rather than take the chance on being executed.
Alan Newman pleads guilty to all the charges against him and is sentenced to 5 life terms without parole, plus 100 years for handgun violations.
Looking back, it was the collective efforts of more than a dozen police agencies contributing interviews and evidence that led to the successful conclusion of this case.
The accomplishment for all police officers and all investigators is to arrest the bad guy and put him in jail. And when you do that, you get a nice warm feeling for about 10 minutes until the next case comes in and you have to start all over again.
But for now, every investigator who worked this case is content to know they have ended one man's violent rampage.